guys, this is Jeff Stanek with Figured Out Baseball. Got a great Figured Out Baseball podcast today. Somebody I'm really excited to talk to, a high-energy guy who I believe is a real student of the game and someone that I'm excited to get into a podcast with. This is Tim Miller, who's joining us today. He's the head coach at Davis Elkins College, a Division II school in Elkins, West Virginia. I'll give you a background on Coach Miller before we jump into questions with him so you know a little bit about where he's come from and things that he's done. He spent the springs of 2007 and 8, and then again springs of 2011 through 2014 as a high school coach in the Pittsburgh area. His 2013 team that he was a part of set the state record by winning their first 25 games of the season. Pretty incredible. 2015 and 16 were his first seasons as a college coach. He spent 2 seasons as the pitching coach at Pitt Greensburg, a Division III school in Greensburg, Pennsylvania. In his 2 seasons there, the team went 46 and 38. The team also set 15 team records and 32 individual records in his 2 seasons. In 2017 and 18, he was the pitching coach and recruiting coordinator at Frostburg State, a Division III school in Frostburg, Maryland. His 2018 team there finished 23 and 14 overall. That same season, the pitching staff led all of NCAA Division III with 11.0 strikeouts per 9 as a pitching staff. In 2019 and 2020, he was an assistant coach and the hitting coach at Franklin College, a Division III school in Franklin, Indiana, just south of Indianapolis. The 2019 team there made the deepest postseason run in program history. They won the conference championship, made it to the regional final. They finished 31 and 15 overall that season. He was then hired at Davis and Elkins as the head coach on September 1st, officially September 1st of 2020. Coach Miller also has experience working with summer collegiate teams as well as high school summer travel organizations. A guy that's been to several different levels, as you can see, has a lot of experience and a lot of experience winning, which I always appreciate talking with guys that have that sort of background. So, Coach Miller, sincerely appreciate you spending the time on the podcast with us today.
Jeff, thank you so much for having me, and I might have to hire you as my PR guy here going forward after that nice intro. So, thank you very much. For
Next job you apply for, man, you give me a call. I'll be on the phone.
I will. I don't know if I can afford you, but I'll do whatever I can to make it happen.
Probably more affordable than you think. So I like to typically start with something from the podcast that stands out. And, for you, there are several areas, but I want to ask about maybe an odd thing, but you spent 2 seasons as a high school coach and then took several seasons off where you were not coaching and then jumped back into high school baseball, then jumped into college baseball. So I want to kind of ask about the couple seasons where you weren't coaching and maybe sort of what happened to you in that period of time or just what it was like for you to then decide that you wanted to jump back in, and a couple years later you're a college coach where clearly this is something that you decided it was something you wanted to do. You wanted to make a career out of it. So I'm kind of just interested to see what happened in those couple years where you were not coaching.
Okay, fair enough. So my first coaching job ever was at Cannon McMillan High School, not too far from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And when I first started coaching, I guess more than anything, I never envisioned myself going into coaching. My high school coach, Steve Busey, called me when he took the Cannon McMillan job in the late summer of 2006, and he said, "Hey, do you want to coach?" And I said, "Yeah, absolutely, sounds great." Chance to reunite with him, who I played for from 2000 to 2002 at South Park High School, and so in my mind, there was, as a player, we had some success, but we were never able to get over that hump at that level and win a championship. Lost in a district championship game, lost in the state quarterfinals. So it was more about the things that we didn't accomplish as a player. And I thought, hey, maybe as a coach we get a chance to compete for championships. That's something that has always been, on my mind. It's something that I wanted to do. And so I ended up at Canamac, a tremendous group of players there. And in our second year, which was spring of 2008, we won a state championship in the largest classification in Pennsylvania. So, for me at that time, it was maybe too many good things happened too fast. And you think about all the time and effort, and I know you've done some high school coaching yourself. You think of the time and the effort that you put into it. And for me, there was a little bit of an emptiness. Like, okay, well, accomplished the biggest goal that I had in mind, and didn't really have that same thirst at the time, to try to want to get back into baseball. life was taking me in different directions. Just thinking, hey, is it time for me to start to, settle down? And am I going to have a family of my own soon? What does that look like? So I took some time away, but what I also realized in that time away was I found myself more drawn to learning even more and more about baseball, about coaching, something that I didn't really have. I just kind of went with what I knew in that first go-around in Cannon McMillan, and I realized, stepping away from baseball, that I didn't know that much. So I started to really hone in on different ideas and different thoughts, and just thought, you know what, I still do have this passion for baseball, and I was fortunate where I had a chance to come back to my high school alma mater at South Park for the spring of 2011 was my first year there, and I couldn't turn down that opportunity. It was also a chance to reunite with Steve Busey, who was again my high school coach and who I coached with at Cannon McMillan. And the South Park program at that time had kind of fallen into a state of disrepair. They hadn't been to a playoff game in a number of years, and the team was not coming off of a very successful previous season. But I said, hey, this is a chance to kind of build something again. It's personal to me. It's my alma mater, and we're really fortunate where the core of that team was a young group. It was a group that we have a chance to be together with for a few years, and incredibly blessed to be around some really, really talented players. The guy who's now ascended and probably gotten the most headlines, a guy who pitches for Minnesota Twins right now, Randy Dobnak, who's done a fantastic job. He was a wonderful pitcher at Alderson Broadus here in West Virginia in his college years. And was undrafted coming out of college. He's worked his way through independent ball, and now he's entering what will be his third season with Minnesota Twins. But we had other guys. Nick Yobi was a fantastic player for us at South Park. He played at UST Aiken. We had a kid named Carter Grote who walked on at Furman and pretty much started for 4 years. So we had some talented guys. It was just a matter of providing that structure and allowing them to kind of find their best versions of themselves.
And then at what point did you seriously consider that you wanted to jump into college baseball? When I got back into baseball, I had a chance to work some different camps, throughout the summer. That just, hey, we need a guy. And around that time, Coastal Carolina was doing some satellite camps in the Western Pennsylvania area. And not that Coastal has ever talked to me about hiring me. That would be pretty shocking. But just being around different college coaches that were working there, and had developed a few connections. And starting around, I want to say it was like summer of 2012, started to have some inklings. Hey, if this is something you want to do, you might have an opportunity. And at that time I said, no. And finally, it was the summer of 2014, and Anthony Williams, who was the coach at Pitt Greensburg at that time and is now actually the head coach at Frostburg State, entering his second year at Frostburg State. Anthony had called me kind of at the beginning of that summer and said, hey, we need a guy. And I was non-committal at that point. And, we had some discussions, but I didn't think it was going to work out. And finally, he was getting ready to start his fall season in the fall of 2014. Late August, early September, phone rings, and it's him, and he says, hey, look, just come out for the fall. And, that was at least, a very persuasive move, because I said, you know what, all right, I can commit to the fall. That's pretty easy. And then, of course, I showed up for one workout, and I was hooked, and I was ready to roll. So, but the backstory there is actually that he, at that time at Pitt Greensburg, he had a number of players that I had known, some guys that I'd had a chance to coach in various capacities, but guys that I just knew from, Pitt Greensburg pretty much at that time, a lot of Western PA guys and guys that I knew and was familiar with and had known for several years. And they're like, they had an opening on the staff, and they said, hey, to Anthony, you got to fix Tim Miller, And so without those guys kind of pushing it as well, I wouldn't have that opportunity. And, you look at the chain of events, I never would have ended up at Frostburg, never would have ended up at Franklin. I'd never be here at Davis Elkins now. So
I'm indebted to a lot of people, I guess, in this journey.
And I think that's a similar story that most people have. I mean, everybody's indebted to somebody just for giving them a chance at some point along the way. I know that, for me, my first coaching job was at Duquesne with Coach Mike Wilson, and I wasn't expecting it. I owe a very big debt of gratitude to him just for taking a chance on me. I know I've told this story on other podcasts, but I saw him in the locker room one day. Like I was working out after I finished playing. I saw him in the locker room, which that was the first time I had ever seen him in the locker room. So I feel like maybe there was a reason for that. Somebody orchestrated that. But the first time I ever saw him in the locker room, and I just kind of said, "Hey, I think I'd like to get into coaching. You have any ideas?" And I was thinking like, a summer travel team for like a 15U travel team, and he said, "Why don't you come help me?" I thought, "Holy cow, I could do that," and then several other jobs too. Other jobs I just look at and just kind of wonder like why they chose me, and I made it a habit when I was leaving places just to thank whoever hired me and just kind of say like, "Man, I don't know why you took a chance on me, but I'm really glad that you did, and hopefully I did what you thought I would do." So I think everybody's in that place, and I love hearing the stories about what other guys have been through and just the people that they kind of owe to. So, Tim, if I can ask you now, as a Division II head coach, and this is going to be your first season as a Division II head coach, but what did your years of high school coaching, what do you remember from that, and maybe any ways that has shaped you as a head coach and sort of your style or your philosophy of coaching now? Do you still carry anything with you from those high school days?
No question, and I look at myself as incredibly fortunate because I've had a chance to work with a lot of guys that I think are Hall of Fame types. But speaking strictly to the high school, and we'll eventually, I'm sure, get more to the college, but in high school, you're given a roster. You don't get to select your roster. It's whoever lives in the district goes to the school. So it's about maximizing that roster. And that's the one thing I think that has really stood with me throughout is the idea that every team is unique. Even if you have the same guys back, they develop, maybe they find that maybe something clicks and they're a different type of player. So every team is unique, and what you do with one team you might not do with the next. But also with the individual players, I think embracing their differences is very important. So, in high school, I might have something, whether it be from a pitching perspective, a hitting perspective, a defense perspective, whatever the case might be, I might have something that I believe in 100% mechanically. You should be doing it. You should move this way. But that movement might not be something that player is comfortable with or even capable of doing. So I could sit there until I'm blue in the face and force them to do it my way, and they don't have conviction, they don't have confidence in what they're doing, and then they can't execute. Or we could find something else that works, because it is baseball and there's a lot of different ways to play this game. So I think that's really the biggest thing for me from high school that I've carried forward all these years is trying to embrace the individuality of the player and work around that framework. And I feel confident in saying that guys that I've had a chance to coach, guys that I'm coaching now, would say that if anything, it's flexibility of approach. And then I guess really the other part of that equation, and we've talked about this previously, which is just the idea that communication piece. How I talk to one player, that message might not get through to the next one. So you've got to be able to balance that out and still find a way to, hey, how can I best communicate? Do I need to show this guy? Is this a guy who needs to see more things on video? Is this somebody I can just talk to and explain, and the way I explain it clicks? There's always going to be those differences, but the end goal is we want to get the most productivity out of whatever it is we're talking about, and find the best solution.
And it's a hard balance to figure that out, and sometimes it takes a while to figure out players and exactly how you need to communicate with them, and what the best way is to get a message across. For you, just if you're talking with coaches who that's not a strength for, or it's a challenge to be that way with players. Like, what's your strategy, I guess, for lack of a better term, to figure out, like, from player to player, what's the best way to communicate with with so-and-so? Are you asking them certain questions? Is it sort of like you kind of try to get to know their personality a little bit, or maybe you talk to them one day and it doesn't really seem to register, so tomorrow I'm going to try a different approach? Like, how do you go about, just because you have a big roster and you have a lot of new players every year, and how do you just go about figuring out, or like you take over a new program, you have, a whole roster, 35, whatever, you have 30, 35 guys, new guys that you've got to learn now. How do you as a coach figure out how to communicate with each guy?
Yeah, I think it's more than anything, you've got to have those other conversations that don't involve baseball. You have to be who you are authentically. So for me, I'm interested in what our guys are doing in the classroom. I'm interested in what are their career ambitions and things like that. The more you can have that open dialogue, I think that allows everybody to let their hair down, and then you can get to those real honest discussions. No coach ever wants to have a discussion, hey, this isn't working for you. I wish it was all rainbows and sunshine every day, every day and every through every drill, every swing, every ball we feel, but that's not realistic. So I think first and foremost, you got to have a continuous dialogue with each player. And it can't just be about baseball. I mean, at least for me, it's got to be about more, because that fits who I am and where my authentic interests are. The second thing I would say is that you've got to be able to check your ego at the door. Some coaches, I've got friends that coach, and their biggest focus is they want to have their stamp on, maybe it's hitting or pitching. This guy's going to be a Tim Miller guy. And I just don't think that's something that really needs to matter. If our guy's successful, if they hold the bat cross grip, and they can hit 400 and be an All-American, why would I stand in the way of that just for my own ego? And I think that's an important distinction as well, is that it's got to be, if you're able to check that at the door and not really concern yourself too much with that, then that allows, I think, for that flexibility of approach, so that you can be open to different ways of doing things and embracing those differences that occur from player to player on your roster.
I know that the college head coaching is a new deal for you, but in that sense, you probably want to surround yourself with certain types of coaches, certain types of assistant coaches. In your mind, what makes a good assistant coach? Like what about, maybe you start with a resume before you really get to know guys, or maybe there's guys that maybe the guys that you want to hire are people that you want to have familiarity with. So I guess let me just ask you the broad question. What to you are some boxes that guys need to check to have a chance to be on your radar, whether it's somebody previously or something on their resume? What sort of things stand out for you for an assistant coach, before making a hire, when maybe sort of narrowing down the field of applicants?
Well, our current assistant, Tyler Rabaski, if he's not one of the best assistant coaches in the country, then I don't know anything at all. And really, he's a prototype of what I would be looking for in an assistant coach. And we had a chance to work together the last 2 years at Franklin College. But it's a combination of things. One, you've got to really be a grinder. I mean, Jeff, you've been an assistant in college baseball. I know I have been. There's a lot of long nights, early mornings, and there's going to be certainly a lot of headaches that go into the court any day, any week, any month, whatever time frame you want to look into it. So you've got to have a great work ethic, to be a strong assistant and somebody, me personally, that I would be looking for as an assistant. The second component I would say is you've got to really commit to learning. I'm yet to find the person that has all the answers, and you've got to at least be able to consider different schools of thought, because just because we've done things one way for 10 years doesn't mean it's the best way to do it. And I know for Tyler and myself, both being at Franklin College, with Lance Marshall's the head coach there, I could do a podcast just talking about how great Lance Marshall is. And I mean, he's a Hall of Famer in every metric for me. But the biggest thing with him is that he's constantly, even now, he's got 500 some wins. He's done just about everything you can do in college baseball, and he's constantly pushing that envelope. Where he wants to take in new information. He wants to learn things himself, and then that trickles down to the rest of his coaching staff. And, anytime we'd have staff meetings, he would always kind of pose problems. He'd say, hey, it's not enough to point it out. You guys got to figure out a solution and, force you into that. So I think having that idea that you're going to keep learning, you're going to keep being able to really not, I don't know if reinvent is the right word, but you're not afraid of embracing new ideas if they make logical sense. So it's really the work ethic and the learning, and I think that's a great starting point for any assistant coach. And then the final thing I would say is that there's going to be you enter in as an assistant coach, you're kind of low man on the totem pole. There's a lot of undesirable jobs that you're going to have to do. Can you stay positive throughout that, or is that something that just I've seen coaches get eaten up by those menial tasks? Hey, you got to get out there, you got to line the field. Well, why don't we have a grounds crew who does that? Well, our school can't afford that, so here you go. Get used to handling a rake, those kinds of things. And the people that do that with the best energy and the best enthusiasm, I think are the ones that are the guys that we now hear about moving up the ladder and finding their way into the adoration of the rest of the coaching world. I mean, that's everybody from your worst program in the country all the way on up to the Tim Corbins of the world at Vanderbilt. I mean, sometime he was carrying a rake.
No doubt about that. And for me, I love that stuff. And if I'm being really honest and transparent, that's some of the stuff I miss the most. I miss being on a field and raking it, or putting a fresh edge on a field. Like, what's better than like stringing up a field and putting a fresh edge on it and looking at it and be like, God, that looks freaking amazing, or whatever it may be. Just having an infield with like the right amount of moisture in it, where ground balls are just, they're like taking such true hops. Like, that kind of stuff gave me a lot of pleasure as a coach. And I've told my wife this before, that we live in a town where there's a AA team. And I've told her that if I can afford to do it at some point, or maybe when our kids move out of the house, and I've got more time in my hands or whatever, like I might, offer my services there just for free, just volunteer to go over there and work if they'd let me work, like to have a chance to cut the grass again, or like drag a field. Like, that sounds great to me. I really miss that kind of stuff.
Absolutely. And that's one thing you got to love it. If you're in baseball, you got to love those jobs. You got to learn to embrace them.
Now, for you, Tim, you kind of mentioned some names there, and just some people that you look up to, or people that you've learned some things from. But I want to ask maybe a little more pointed question. Just who have been some people who have really impacted your career in a positive way? And it can be a coach, it could be somebody outside of baseball who just was an influence for you as far as work ethic or whatever. But who are some people that you've encountered through the years that have impacted you and have helped shape you to who you are?
Well, I think every stop for me in coaching, whether it be high school and college, I just consider myself so fortunate. It's like I've kind of had this like Forrest Gump like existence where everything just works out for me in that way. But starting in high school, and Steve Busey, who I played for and coached with, I consider to be the ultimate player's coach. Not that he's easy to play for. I mean, he can be tough when he needs to be, but somebody that you can't help but love. And the way that he deals with players and the way that he deals with situations, is just I think absolutely first rate. But also watching his mind work on game day, and how I always consider any team that he's playing, hey, it's like spotting that team a couple runs on game day, because he's going to be able to find a way to shut something down that the opponent's doing, or create something for his own offense. Working for Anthony Williams at Pitt Greensburg, I mean, obviously I owe a lot to Anthony. He's a great friend, now a rival at Frostburg, but we'll for the purposes of this podcast, we'll check the rivalry at the door. But he's somebody who, he gave me a chance in college baseball, and just being able to kind of have that introduction, because for me it had been years since I had a chance to play college baseball. So getting used to the structure, getting used to the organization. I think, Anthony's a blue collar guy, likes to roll his sleeves up, get his hands dirty as much as anybody. And, watching him at Pitt Greensburg, which wasn't a super well funded program, watching him extract every bit of value that he could and inject it into that program and then the results, was really interesting. From there, having a chance to work for Guy Robertson at Frostburg State, somebody who, I was coaching at Coastal Plain League in 2016, and the phone rings randomly, and he says, "Hey, got a job open. I know you didn't apply for it, but would love to have you on board." And I said, "Tell me about it. What is this?" And just being around him and getting used to kind of how he did things. Specifically on the recruiting trail with him, I would always joke that I should just buy him a number 42 Yankees jersey, because I consider him to be a great closer in recruiting. Just somebody who knew how to read the room, but also tremendously honest in what players were going to get when they got to campus. And I think he cashed in on everything that he said. He wasn't promising them, pie in the sky kind of ideas. He was sticking to, hey, this is what Frostburg State can do for you baseball wise. This is what it can do for you school wise. And I would say to a man that he delivered on all of those promises. So just again, somebody that was tremendously beneficial to be around him every single day, pretty much for 2 years, and pick his brains. And then most recently, being at Franklin College with Lance Marshall, that's like getting a PhD in baseball. Being with him, somebody who is so well studied, so well prepared. Just the preparation from him, and how he went about it. Again, another guy who on game day, I promise you, whatever that final score is, he's added to that. He's value added on game day. You're just not going to outfox him. But also with Lance, the one thing that I really, really loved is just how even keeled he was on game days. We could be, had a 6-run lead or something like that. It's now the 9th inning. It's a 1-run lead. There's nobody out. The opponent has bases loaded, and our fate is on the line, and it looks like certain doom. And I'll bet you his blood pressure's probably something that everybody would wish they would have. His pulse is there. He's not sweating, and that the confidence that instilled in the players is just wonderful. But I guess the final thought I have for all of those men there, what I really respect about all of them, and this applies to each one of them, is they are authentically themselves. They're not afraid to be who they are, and they're not just trying to show up. They're not worried about what somebody in the center field bleachers is saying. They're not worried about hey, what might a local newspaper say about the game afterwards. They're going with who they are. They're trusting their preparation. They're trusting their players, and they're trusting their staff to do their jobs. And I think that applies to all 4 of those men.
That's not, again, something that's easy to do, especially, depending how much attention your team gets. I've been in towns where the team didn't seem to get much attention at all. I've been in other towns where it seemed like that's what people were always talking about. To be able to coach and not have those voices in your ear is a gift for sure. I want to talk about recruiting a little bit, Coach. With you kind of brought that up at Frostburg and just some things that you've learned through the years recruiting, and I'd like to just ask you about recruiting in general, and not so much maybe physically what you look for with guys, but maybe some things that help guys to stand out on the field for you. So if there's a high school player listening to this, or a high school coach who's trying to encourage his players, there are a lot of kids. So just if you start with the pool of all the kids that are available to recruit in every year and every recruiting class, there's a lot of them. There's a lot of kids who have a lot of talent. The higher talent you talk about, like you talked about Vanderbilt earlier, there aren't that many guys in the country that are good enough to play for Vanderbilt. But the further down you go, the pool gets a little bit bigger about how many kids there are. So these kids have to find a way to stand out some way or another if they're going to get recruited by a good quality program. For you, when you're going through the recruiting process, in any part of the recruiting process, whether you're watching a kid, speaking with the kid, speaking with his parents, speaking with his coaches, what are some things that help someone to stand out from the crowd from you? Because you might see 2 guys that are very similar talent level, stuff flies, their measurables are pretty similar, but somebody's got, one of those guys is going to stand out a little bit one way or another, or has a chance to. What are some things that you as a coach like to see or will help a player to stand out to you, or when you're going out to recruit, maybe help put a little extra star next to his name? Like, I like that kid. I don't know, I just, something about him I like. Like, what are some things that you see that help you to make that distinction?
Yeah, and I would say it's the intangibles. A few years ago, I was out watching a summer game, and for instance, there was a kid in right field. Hadn't noticed him at all. He was nondescript at the plate. I think he walked on maybe 4 or 5 pitches, didn't swing the bat, hadn't gotten a ball yet in right field. But there was a play where he ended up sprinting in from right field and backing up third base. And it was a weird play, and I can't remember exactly all the particulars of how that ended up. And I remember watching that, and I said, that kid was exactly where he needed to be. And of course, there was an overthrow, and he prevented a run from scoring. So then I thought, let's see this kid next time he comes around in the batter's box. Well, that next at bat, he got a chance to swing a little bit, and thought, okay, here's a guy that might be able to do some things in the baseball player, but he's clearly he's at least well taught or thinking about the game, in those ways that don't necessarily show up in the box score. Get to know the kid, and talk to some of the people that are closest with him, his high school coach, so on and so forth. Find out that this kid, eats, sleeps, drinks baseball. He can't get enough of it. They kind of have to turn the lights out to let him know it's time to leave their indoor facility at night. And so you look at it and you say, hey, here's a guy who's what I would say is a baseball player. He gets the flow of the game, and he's got the work ethic to match. So really, those two intangibles, I think are so critical. I think they allow players that maybe give up a little bit in terms of some of the measurables. So, what's the difference between that kid that has a 95-mile-an-hour exit velocity off the tee and the kid who's 87 off the tee? Well, if the 87 kid's just understands how to play baseball, he's got a high baseball IQ, that kid can outperform a kid that has a higher exit velocity. Or maybe a kid's a 7.2 60 runner as opposed to a 6.6. There's plenty of good 6.6 runners. There's plenty of good 7.2 runners, and I'd say there's plenty of subpar in both of those categories as well. So to me, it's the intangible. Do you have a feel for the baseball game? Can you make baseball plays? Is this a guy who really understands, hey, how to get a dirt ball read? Is this somebody who can take that instruction? And then is this somebody who has the work ethic to go after it? I mean, we talk with our guys here at Davis Elkins all the time. Everybody has their time slot now for practice in anticipation of the season, whether that's an indoor time or an outdoor time. So how are you really becoming a better ball player? How are you distancing yourself versus players that you're better than already? And how are you catching up on players that are better than you? You got to find 10 minutes. You got to find 20 minutes to do more targeted reps, maybe throughout the day. So when we have open periods throughout the day, the expectations is for our guys, it's not mandatory, but it's, hey, if you have the ability to get out, at least get a couple of those sessions in a week, so that you can continue to develop, continue to build as a baseball player. And that's something that absolutely, on the recruiting trail, you're looking for those recommendations. Hey, this kid has an elite work ethic, because I'm sure I'm sure this is striking a chord with you and from your college days. A really high-end player, talent-wise, with no work ethic is probably not worth your time and investment.
Yes, I found it out the hard way several times, just feeling like as a coach, like I can bring this guy in and I can help him to be what I want him to be, or help him to work a little harder, or like a coach would say, like, he's been lazy in the past, but he's really been working hard in the last couple months. And I think he really has figured it out. And then I've signed that guy, and he goes right back to being the guy that he was before. And it's like, I don't know, some guys, they do it just long enough to get themselves a scholarship offer, and then they shut it down.
Right.
But for you, is it more difficult for you, Coach Miller, to I know you've coached both pitchers and hitters. Is it more difficult for you to recruit pitchers or hitters?
Well, I think it's equally challenging for both, and this transcends institution, I guess. I mean, every school has pros and cons. Where I'm at now, Davis and Elkins, you look around, there's mountains out here. So naturally, we're going to have some snow. We're going to have some colder days. This environment isn't for everybody. As much as I wish it was, say it's a one-stop shop for everybody, it's not for everybody. So it's more about trying to identify those guys that, I consider myself a blue-collar guy. I'm not afraid to roll my sleeves up. I'm not afraid to get to work. And those types of players are the ones we're looking for. Whether that be a hitter, a pitcher, et cetera. But I think anymore, the thing that I run into the most is you get people who are maybe just getting dragged along in schools' recruiting processes, meaning they're keeping enough tabs on them, but they don't really have serious interest for them. They're kind of a backup plan. And identifying serious interest versus not so serious interest. There are some schools that will recruit entirely off of measurables. I like to see guys in person. COVID's changed that a little bit. It's made it a little more difficult to do. But you might get somebody who on a recruiting site, this guy's 87 to 89 right-handed pitcher. So now you get a bunch of schools that are contacting them, but they don't really have a plan for that person. They don't really have an interest. So I think that it's about really finding the guys that fit the program, and understanding that there's probably now more opportunities to be seen and more interest in most every player than there's ever been before, just because of the ways that people can interact with those recruits.
There's so much to the recruiting, and probably just like anything else, any other job out there, I guess, there are a lot of good recruiters out there, and there's just something that separates, the good recruiters from the really good, from the exceptional recruiters. And you look at some of these programs at any level, it doesn't matter if it's teams you're seeing on TV or not, but the teams that just win every year consistently, the coaches out there who win every year consistently, they just have a little bit of a different way of doing things. When you're recruiting hitters, Coach Miller, for me personally, it was even though as a hitting coach and a background as a hitter, it was easier for me to recruit pitchers than it was for hitters, because with hitters, I felt like you could get fooled more often than not, because you might really like a guy's tools, you like his swing, you like his bat speed, he looks athletic, but you see him a couple times and he doesn't really hit, and you're wondering if he just flat out can't hit no matter how good of an athlete he is. Or you see another guy a couple times and he just has a couple of good games where, he does barrel some balls and maybe the swing's kind of ugly, but he just barrels the ball up. And as a hitting coach, you're like, well, like you said earlier, I don't care how it looks as long as he can barrel the ball. But then sometimes you get those guys and they just don't end up being what you see from them. How do you, whether it's you recruiting or whether you're talking with other coaches on your staff, how do you go about just figuring out whether a hitter, like who a hitter really is? Because again, small sample size, anybody can heat up or cool down for small sample sizes. How do you really try to find out who this guy is when you really dig down?
Well, I certainly think that the thing that we try to identify when we look at any hitter is figuring out what their approach is. So that's something I think that doesn't get talked about enough, is the hitting approach. It's not sexy enough. It's not going to sell any books or subscriptions. It's just one of those things that it's incredibly important, but how do you quantify it, right? So if we're looking at a kid and we're evaluating a hitter, whether it be a high school kid, junior college kid, what have you, let's say he's in a situation where it's 2-0, nobody's on base, and he's swinging at a pitch that's 6 inches off the plate. Well, I would say his approach is subpar. or either that, or he's really bad at recognizing pitches.
Both of them are pretty bad. Both of those things are bad.
Runner at third, less than 2 outs. The infield's up, so he's got to get something in the air. What types of pitches is he swinging at? Is he swinging at that pitch that's kind of mid-shin that he's likely to hit on the ground, or is he forcing that pitcher at least when he has control of the count to kind of elevate the ball and make his job easier to get that runner home from third? So when we go out, we have a template, and I'm happy to share this. I don't have any secrets here. We have a template that we look at, and we've got all different kinds of situations already mapped out. So if we see a guy in a situation, we find that box, and hey, did they execute or did they not execute? Because you might have a guy his numbers look fantastic, but he's piling those up in tilted games and in the late innings. That's when he does his most damage, as opposed to when it's really a big situation or early in the game, and they're facing that elite pitcher. How do they handle that? So that's something that we try to evaluate. It's not a perfect science. It's certainly subjective to our own eyes and our own minds, but it gives us a chance to kind of rank and file different hitters that we would evaluate. Now, from the easier to measure kind of category, love line drives. They did a study in Division I baseball. I think this was 2 years ago. It might be 3 years ago now. And they looked at all the ground balls that were hit. They looked at all the fly balls that were hit, and they looked at all the line drives were hit. And this was using the TrackMan data at the stadiums that have it. And they found that 20% of ground balls in that season went for hits, 24% of fly balls, and 68% of line drives. So naturally, we're looking for guys who can hit line drives consistently. We're also looking to train that way when they get here.
I love that, and I think that's something that more people need to hear. I know we got to wrap this up, Coach, but I have one more just quick question for you that's about one of the things that you just brought up with approach. So, for example, if you're going out to recruit and you're interested in this hitter, and there's a man on third, less than 2 outs, and it's a situation where that run at third is pretty important and he needs to be brought home. My perception, and again, I haven't coached college ball for a while. I only coached high school for a little bit, never coached travel ball especially. But in travel ball, it seems like players are not encouraged to look at that situation and think that I've got to find a way to get this guy in. They're just encouraged to try to swing as hard as they can and hit the ball as hard as they can and try to showcase themselves as opposed to just playing the game and trying to win the game. Do you factor that in when you're going out, or basically if a guy, regardless of why a hitter doesn't have that approach, if he doesn't recognize that situation and have the approach, you are turned off by it? Or do you look at it like, it is travel ball and his coaches probably aren't encouraging him to do that, so I'll just teach him that. We'll just teach him that when he gets here and he'll figure it out then. Like how do you approach that situation and just in trying to evaluate that particular type of skill?
Yes, I certainly have seen the same things that you're talking about, whether that be in a summer travel session, as well as even junior college baseball. Everybody wants to put up numbers. It's probably the easiest way to get recognized, right? And that ground out to second base with the infield back, it drives in a run, but RBI totals are maybe not something that always catch attention. So. For our purposes, if we see it, it's a guy that we still like. It's a discussion point. Hey, take me through that at bat. You had runner at third, less than 2 outs. It was the fourth inning. Failed to execute to get him in. What were you thinking? And then start the discussion from there. So there are guys that we're recruiting that haven't signed here. That are still active recruits or have chosen to go to other institutions, and we've had those discussions with those guys. I think that's important. To not be afraid to bring up those subjects, because really the execution, it's a desire of the player. Hey, what is my approach going to be? They can control that. There's so many things that they can't control, but they can control their thought process and essentially what they're looking for in a given at bat. Now, they might not get a pitch that allows them to satisfy a condition, so that has to be taken into account as well. But more than anything, it's so critical for those guys to at least be able to show that they can think through those situations. Because if they have never thought about it in their entire career, and then they come to college baseball at any level, that's going to probably lead to a lot of frustration for that player, and it's going to make their job as far as ultimately getting comfortable and having conviction in what they're doing. It's going to make it harder and harder. So that's definitely something that we take into account, but it's something that it really starts with just having that dialogue. Hey, take me through that at bat. And in my experience, the best hitters, they want to talk about hitting. They love talking about hitting. So whether it's a situation, whether it's a certain pitch that they were looking for in a spot, and just watching those guys open up, and it can be it can lead to a really productive dialogue. And I think that helps building that relationship as well when you talk about the recruiting side of things, and then giving them a preview of, hey, what to expect when they would get, in this case here at Davis Elkins, or to any institution thereafter.
This is really great stuff. This is Tim Miller, everybody. He's the head coach at Davis Elkins College. This will be his first spring in 2021 at Davis Elkins. Davis Elkins is Division II in West Virginia. Coach Miller, I sincerely appreciate the time.